Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Oh, we're on. I caught myself off guard. You know,
you were too efficient.
Well, no, you know what it is okay, this here, this is called a mouse.
Okay, yep.
And it's got two little buttons on there. And a lot of how I interact with the computer is through the clicking of those buttons. Now, you'll notice that this one does not have a cord. This is connected magically through Bluetooth. So between here and my computer, there's like messages being sent. Well, the problem is I also have this, which is this metal water cooler, and this disrupts the messages.
Blocks the signal.
I'm sometimes like it'll like double click when I only want a single click, and so I think that's what happened. But
interesting.
But it worked. It worked, and we're recording.
It worked. Have you ever heard of the tech term ID10T?
ID10T?
Yeah.
Identity?
ID. Nope. So it's, I have to kind of write it. Oh, goodness. This is hilarious. You right. If you write ID, then the number 10, and then T, what do you think you get?
Identity.
Nope. Look. Okay, I'm going to do it in the chat. ID 10.
Oh, I know.
T.
I don't even need to see it. That's wow.
I'm not saying that. I would never.
You're right.
That's just a term that I've heard.
You know what?
Like, this mouse and this bottle, and it just.
Well, let me just say this. Some people might be totally offended by that. I, however, have just seen a sermon about bearing with one another. And so.
Yes, you have. And thank you for exercising patience with me today. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we deal with the real stuff on the show, Dan. This isn't fluff. This is heavy hitting, boots on the ground. Like we're dealing with the real stuff, and sometimes we are the example. So, yeah, we are in week 6 of our political distortion series. Political distortions, examining our heart postures. And this week was a continuation of looking at some of those imperatives, some of those heart postures. So going from big picture to kind of more drilling down into the nitty gritty of what our part in things, what we can do in the midst of everything that's going on around us.
That's right.
That's what it was. Okay, great. So we will have a summary. There was some stuff that got left out. We can chat about that. We'll have a nugget. We'll just do our thing.
Yeah, before I jump into the summary, I just think it's so cool how we get these almost a year ago exactly. The same thing happened where the MuseCast just took over the church, because we've had 2 weeks in a row now where either you're preaching or I'm preaching, and either you're doing announcements or I'm doing announcements. And I don't know why we're not the highest paid people in this organization, because I don't know, just look at the statistics, look at the numbers, that's all I have to say about that. But it's been fun.
I will say that we absolutely are the MVPs.
Yes.
We absolutely should be being paid the highest on the roster. And I think our agents need to get on that. Who are our agents? Well, sure.
Yeah. I'll have a funny story, but it's probably doesn't fit here. So I'm going to just go ahead and find my glasses and do this summary. So we are in the series. You did your sermon on bearing with one another, which is found in Colossians. And you started off, though, and I really appreciated this. You started off by looking at the description, or not the description, but the commentary in our little bumper video that we do right before the sermon. And really the bumper video is sort of to set up the sermon, but it also gives us a chance to get rid of all the musicians and get set up for the pastor. And And so we have these little bumper videos, and, it's easy to kind of go numb to what is actually being said in those videos. And so I'll be honest, I had no idea like what was being said there, because I was always like hustling to get stuff done and get ready for the next
Right.
thing. And
Right.
and so it was really great that you started your sermon by just saying, "Hey, let's look at these words. You don't let these words kind of blow by you, because this is important." And it really does capture sort of what our goal is with the series. And so you started by looking at that, and then you transitioned into your message, which is Paul tells us to bear with one another, and that's the imperative that you were looking at. And I appreciated also that you kind of looked at how all of that was set up in Colossians 3. Before he says that, he talks about like putting on compassion and putting on humility, and then what that looks like in with others is that you have patience and you bear with them. And so, in other words, you kind of have this like, but then you go one step farther back, which I think was really good, is that the reason why you bear with others is because you have put on this kind of compassion and humility. You have put on this holiness. And the reason why you do that is because you are a chosen one. God has chosen you to be set apart and to be different. He has chosen you for this particular calling. And so there is this chain of kind of postulates that lead to this bear with one another. And so I thought that was really helpful, just to kind of set the conceptual stage for this patient bearing with others. And then you talked a little bit about what patience is not. You shared a personal kind of example of your own struggle with it. And yeah, I it's a lot easier to talk about the diet you're going to go on next year than it is to actually start the diet today. And so I can appreciate that feeling of, yeah, I'll preach on that in 6 months. And then when we actually get there, it's a lot different. So
yeah.
And then you kind of looked at how important this imperative was for the early church, and I tell you what, you just dipped your toe in that. I mean, because that bearing with others, I think, is it's what created the early church to begin with. Once you get to Augustine, then suddenly you have the political power, which sort of creates this top-down bureaucratic constraint around those who are Christians, and there is this outside-in pressing of the togetherness. But before that, it was really all about this patient bearing with one another that kind of allowed people to bond and created that glue. And so I'm glad that you at least dipped your toe in there, but boy, there's a lot more that could be said about that. And that book that you mentioned, The Early Ferment of the Church, is a good resource for that. Not the most exciting read, but profound.
Yeah.
And then so then you talked about patience in the Messiah, and then you also talked about the alternative to patience and bearing with others, and just how that never works. It just if you're not bearing with others, then you are going to end up dividing, and I think that that's important. And then you just finished with this reminder to remember that we are God's chosen, and that we are to live by the Spirit and be guided by that Spirit. And so it's no wonder that this patience is one of the fruits of the Spirit. And then finally, you shared this hymnal. Is it called "It Is Well with My Soul"? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think it's called "It Is Well," and then like with my yeah.
Okay, you didn't share a hymnal, you shared a hymn.
Hymn.
Hymn. Right. Yeah. Yes. All right. And that sort of I guess that's my summary. Did I miss anything big on that?
No. You covered it. You covered it. That's so Minnesotan.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I always make fun of that on podcasts. They're always like that. No, yeah. It's just like,
like, what is it?
Yeah, right.
Yes or no? Yeah. Yeah, you are so right in the just dipping my toe in the experience of the early church. And that was kind of an intentional, just kind of throwing out that taste because first of all, like most of our topics, they could go on for a few weeks. But this in particular, as I was reading that great resource, but holy buckets, was it like literally pounding my head against the wall because it's thick and it's not like just easy to breeze through. It could be really discouraging, in all honesty. Like when you really get on the inside of what the early church was going through when this call to patience was kind of going forth, it's pretty remarkable. And similarly to what you did with gentleness, it's like this wasn't being said in a time of, slight disagreement. Like, are we going to eat the meat or not? Like, are we going to, no, this was like intense persecution, intense trials and tribulations, and then in the midst of that, this call to patience. And so it was, there's a lot there with the early church and what all they were called to endure. And I just felt like we'd all be uber depressed if I dove too far into that. So do you want me to talk about some of the other?
Well, let me just say what I appreciate about this, and it just fits so nicely with what we're doing here. Is that well, first of all, let me just make this distinction, which I wish I would have kind of mentioned this earlier in the week, but I think it's important to distinguish that patience, like bearing with others. It depends on patience. I mean, we have to be patient with it. That's part of what bearing with one another is being patient. But patience is its own thing also. Patience, I mean, we have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to be patient when we're learning a new skill. And so patience is its own thing. It becomes most relevant as we are bearing with one another, because that's what we have to do during these polarized times. Is we have to learn, instead of excluding others, instead of polarizing, we have to learn how to bear with others. And so I just think that is so it's right in the wheelhouse of what we're trying to do here. And so I'm really glad that we did that imperative. And then the other question is how do you feel like, what do you think, what else could have been said? Is there anything else that you could have kind of leveraged in this sermon, but you just didn't have time? Or another way of saying that is, did you leave anything else out that you could have added?
Yeah. There were, again, only so much time. And I felt like it was really important to include that text from the bumper video, because I don't know why, like, yes, I've heard it, but but really looking at the text, seeing the words was just like a sermon almost in and of itself. And it was, so I wanted to take the time to do that. So when you take the time to do that, you know that you're going to have to shave that time from other places. I also felt like it was important to set up the backstory of the Colossian church, because again, I don't want anyone to think, easy peasy. Like what I'm dealing with is, social media stuff and my family and my neighbor. Like, okay, yes. And they were dealing with some pretty big things as well. Some of the stuff that you always wonder after the fact is like, oh, should I have talked a little bit more, or should I have given more examples of A, B, C, or D? And that's where you just go into like, man, I can't, like, I don't know all the different scenarios that people are dealing with. And I do think that this patience is something, and I believe I said this, it is something that some of us have to be patient with ourselves. Some of us are having to be patient on God because we're in this place of waiting. And most times it's patience with others and how that plays out. And I think another thing that I just dipped my toe in was the correlation between impatience and violence. Because if you just do a thought experiment and play it out, like so many times impatience is a rush to action, a rush to judgment, a rush to, and then a lot of times that does lead to a type of violence, whether it's with our words, with our deeds, whatever. And so that was an interesting, and to try to, when I was going down that rabbit hole in my studies, it was just like, oh man, this is like, I can't like do all of that. But it was pretty interesting, just the alternatives of impatient, like the alternative to patience, which is impatience, and what that leads to, and just the harm of others that happens. And I think we don't always, I think we do sometimes internalize it so much, like, nope, this is just what I need to do, but we forget about the impact that a lack of patience has on those around us. So yeah, there was that. So that was just another thing I feel like I just barely scratched the surface on. And of course, the stuff with the early church, the patient ferment of the early church, again, just scratched the surface there. Yeah. And there were some, I mean, I had to, just because of, it was really wordy. There was that Cyprian dialogue that I just paraphrased, but it's in the notes for all the sermon discussion groups and stuff. So I thought that was actually a good picture of God's patience and how he has always been throughout eternity. And I think you could take time to kind of lay out, like, from creation throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament, just how God has just been so very diligent and patient with humanity. But again, there's only so much time to do all the things. So yeah.
No, that's right. And you know, that's probably like, so one of my weaknesses in academia and Christian thought is church history. And about 3 years ago, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, Greg challenged me personally to kind of up my game a little bit. So I started reading church history here. In fact, let me grab this. Here it is. Yeah, so I read this. This is a really great collection of the early church fathers. They're called the Apostolic Fathers, and this is edited by Michael Holmes, and he was actually one of my professors at Bethel, and so I just randomly got this one. And you can buy these, you know, the Apostolic Fathers, because it's all public domain. It's, you know, from the first 100 years or so after Jesus, and but this one is good because the notes that Dr. Holmes puts in here are really helpful. But what really fascinated me, and these are like basically these letters that were after the New Testament that were shared between the early Christians, and just kind of talking about what was going on, and a lot of martyrdoms in here, and you know, Polycarp is one of them that I've talked about before, where, you know, they kind of record his martyrdom basically, and people just giving it all, and their lives are at stake here. And what's really fascinating is, like, what's driving them is the love of God, and the belief in the resurrection, and the belief in that Jesus is who the Gospels say he is. But what all of that is driving them toward isn't salvation. They assume salvation. What they're driven toward is the unity of the Christians, like Christian unity in each one of these. Like, and these are different people in different parts of, you know, the Middle East and Lower Europe, and they're all over the place. And yet they all have this same vision of unity, and they warn against disunity. And so it's fascinating how almost like the rhythm of this early church is this patient bearing with one another for the sake of unity. And I talked about last week, I talked about how Jesus's goal for us as a church wasn't to be right, it was to be one. That they may be one, Father, even as you are in me and I am in you and the Spirit is in us. May they also be one with one another. So his goal for us is to have the same profound unity that the Trinity has. That's very different than being right about all the important hot topics. It requires us to have that patient bearing with one another. And that's why I just think it's such a perfect topic for what we're doing here.
Well, absolutely. And that actually, what you were just talking about reminds me of something else that I was kind of studying a little bit for the sermon, but I didn't end up using, was the idea of the community doing this together. So it was a lot of talk of habitus, like how do we live in this patience, not just as a choice that, oh, I choose patience in this moment, but as a very fabric of our being. And the thought there is we can only do that so much on our own. It is the community deciding and living that together, being one together to live out that type of lifestyle. Let's just say the lifestyle of bearing with one another and being patient, all agreeing together to do this, and then having to work it out when those conflicts come and when other opposition comes. But just there was a thread there that I thought was pretty interesting. But then again, you can't go into all of the things. But yeah, just what you were saying just reminded me of that, like this oneness, not necessarily being right, but like togetherness, this oneness, this unity, and in that unity being able to walk this out as just as natural as the air that we breathe. For me, I have to think of, like, it is not, in all honesty, a natural reaction. Patience is not my natural reflex. So I have to work on it. But these communities that we were talking about in the early church, it was their reflex. And when that was being challenged, that's when some of these teachings were coming forth and these admonishments and encouragements. So I just thought that was really fascinating as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And boy, we could definitely use some bearing with one another in our world today. That's for sure.
Yeah. You strike me as a more chill person. Should I infer from that patience is something that is a little, I'm not going to say easier, because I don't know that it's easy for anyone. But is that something that you feel like you can tap into pretty quickly?
You had to go there, didn't you? You had to bring up Dan's psychology. Okay.
Listen,
okay.
I talked about me. Now let's talk about you.
Just because you have a confession doesn't mean I have to confess. All right.
I feel like we're in this together, Dan. We're in this together. Come on. You can do it.
Well, here's what I will say. I think that I do tend to be pretty tolerant of others. However, here's what I would say is that sometimes things that are not so virtuous can look like tolerance. And so I do tend to be more laid back. But that part of that is just because I'm trying to assume the best in others, and I'm trying to be tolerant. And so I think part of my motives are pure. But I think part of my motives is I don't like conflict, and so that's the not as good part of my personality, and conflict avoidance is not bearing with one another, and that's why Paul also says, "Do not let the sun go down on your anger." So bear with them, but not in this passive avoid conflict sort of way. It's part of bearing with is that you are confronting the whatever it is that is in dispute, but you're doing that with faithfulness and loyalty to the other person and persistence. And I'll also say this, marriage really does a good job of showing where our virtues are pure and where they might look virtuous, but they're actually a cover for something that's less virtuous. And in my marriage, definitely what I noticed early on is my conflict avoidance tended to get in the way of Barbara and I kind of finding new levels of reconciliation. And she is really good at being loyal to our togetherness. And so she would not let arguments go until we had a resolution, until we had some clarity on it. Whereas me, I'm okay with just, let's agree to disagree. And about some things that's okay, but about other things that's important to the relationship, no, it's better to just keep working it out and keep working at it. And so I've learned a lot from her on that. And so that's my confession. And now, do I have to pay for counseling here? Is this part of,
Listen, let's just say that's payback for getting me coffee yesterday. That was your payment.
Good.
No,
good.
No, actually, I am so glad that you went there, because it brings up, I think, a very important point that I haven't yet talked about today. And that is that patience is not, like you said, conflict avoidance. Patience is not, again, like last week, inaction. And we can very easily get confused by those. And in fact, we had some parishioners visiting from out of state. And so I got to talk to them after service. And one of them, just a sweet gentleman, he asked for prayer because he said, I need discernment and wisdom to know the difference, because many times what I think is patience is really just withdrawing, and it's avoiding. And so I get credit for being, just patient and even keel. He's like, but that's not what it is. He's like, I don't want to go there. And so I am so glad you said that, because it is so true that bearing with one another, it's you got to do the one another stuff. Like you have to be with one another. And that doesn't mean that you're just opting out. It doesn't mean it's an action. Bearing with means like, hey, we're going to process this. We're going to deal with this. We're going to patiently try to get to some sort of resolution, and remembering that this is all about trying to restore all things. And every time I say that, and I'm talking about relationships, I feel like I have to have the caveat of, unless it's just unhealthy and abusive, then no, you need to be safe, and restoration can happen in different ways. But avoidance is not what we're saying here. Withdrawal is not what we're saying. Inaction is not what this is. This is, bearing with.
That's right.
Other people.
The with is just as important as the bearing.
Yes, you got to do it. You got to do it. All right, Dan, we have a couple of more weeks in political distortions, and then we're back to Revelation. Shock and awe. I mean, hey. So for those of you who have been wondering how long that this series is going to go, we've got a couple of more weeks. So just, you want to give, just let them know kind of how we're going to, not the details of the topics, but just how we're going to round out this series, and also just kind of your reflections on 6 weeks in. I know it veered off from your original baby that you had birthed and brought forth. It grew into something else a little different, but how are you feeling about what we've done as a community with this topic for the last 6 weeks?
Yeah. So there's two things there. The first thing I'll answer is how do I feel about the series? I feel the same way that I feel when I do a sermon, where I toil at putting together this sermon. And then usually the first draft of the sermon, even though I've toiled and I've sweat blood, not literally, but I've just toiled at it. And then somehow between Thursday and Sunday, it's totally different. And so, but ultimately, I always try to have something to say and be prepared, but not be so strict that the Holy Spirit can't work in there and do what the Holy Spirit wants to do. And so my takeaway is always if I'm gonna give what I feel in the moment is what God is putting on my heart to share. And I'm just going to trust that is going to bless people and do whatever God wants it to do to the best of my ability and given the circumstances. And that's the way I feel about the series also. It did go different than I had planned. And it's definitely not how I would have done it. But at the same time, boy, the feedback that I've heard from people is just so encouraging that I just know that, yeah, again, here's an idea for a series, and then we're doing this together. So you have other people coming in and saying, well, I think we should do this. I think we should do this. And that seems right to the team. And so we put that out there, and people have felt very blessed by that. And so, if it is helping people live more Christ-like lives, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It doesn't bother me that it veers off course. And so yeah, that's how I feel about that. Second question is, how are we going to wrap this up? I really think it's going to be just 2 more of these imperatives that I think are really useful. And, again, there's a lot of ways to get to shore when you're out in the water. There's a lot of things that you need to be aware of. And so I just think 2 more useful imperatives that we can put in our flotation belt is going to, that's how we're going to end it. And I think it's going to be great. And I know Greg is excited to get back to Revelation.
Yes.
And I now finally this week I can get back to reading my Revelation books and start to get ready for that next chapter. So
yeah, I've got a new book for that coming my way. And so, yeah, same. As soon as that gets here, I'll dive back into that as well. I would not be surprised if somehow, some way, some sort of Revelation type reference sneaks its way in the last 2 weeks of this series. Totally. I just would not be surprised with Greg. I will say too, like the original, at one point when we were talking about the imperatives as a team, talking about the series, and you had given us a list. How do you remember how this could be?
Oh yeah,
there were so many imperatives, and so I say that to say we are well aware this is not an exhaustive list of imperatives.
In fact, I am putting together. This is a breaking news, I guess. I am putting together a book proposal for it's called Smart to the Heart, where each chapter is going to be an imperative. And I have a lot of that written already. And because I think they're so rich and there are so many of them that I just think it could be really useful. So
I love it.
We could just keep going.
Look at that. For you premium subscribers, look at that breaking news you just got. That is incredible. All right, you guys. So a couple of more imperatives. We're going to finish this out strong. I just, again, want to say, and I did say this at the front end of my sermon, I have really been, to circle back what you were saying about the feedback and people just finding this beneficial, I have really been honestly pleasantly surprised, because I know when you hear, oh, we're going to do a political series, some people are like, there's enough of that in the world. Like, I don't need, but I really do believe the approach that we've taken, the things that have come out in the content have been really helpful. And that is the feedback that I'm hearing as well. And just the way people have jumped in on, the sermon discussions and the workshops and the learn-a-thon. We just have some geeky people that just love to learn the things. And I think it's so cool. And I say that with all the love in my heart. That is not an insult whatsoever. I love it. I love it that we're like, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to do it together. And we're going full bore with it. And to have already surpassed the learning hours goal, I think is great. So again, just a big thank you to everyone for being engaged. And then the final thing I will say about that, and then we will go to nugget time, is that it has not just been folks in America, which is just fascinating to me. I think we always think, man, we've got some issues here in America. And then you hear, there's stuff all over the world, and people are having to navigate waters very similarly to us. Maybe they are a slightly different temperature, maybe the current's slightly different, but they're navigating these waters and they're trying to get to shore just like we are. And so I just think that's been really cool. I love it.
Yeah. Amen to that. So does that mean it's
nugget time? Right. Yes, sir. Good. It's nugget time.
Right. You get to choose, because you're the star.
To choose. Goodness. Well, I have it ready. So, okay, I'll go.
All right.
My nugget is something that I just mentioned on Sunday, and I actually talked about it a little more in depth during the run through on Saturday. But anyway, my nugget is about the eye of the storm.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I just really value about doing these imperatives, these heart postures, is that I feel like these are the, if you want to call them virtues, these are the characteristics, these are the traits that we are to embody that will keep us in the eye of the storm. And when I was looking at that, I found out this really interesting detail. So I knew, at least I thought I remembered hearing that the eye of the storm is actually where it's most calm. Like when you're thinking of a tornado or hurricane, whatever, all the winds and all the storms and everything blowing around, the eye of that storm is where it's calm and it's peaceful. And a few years ago, I would say probably in 2020, when things were just really kind of, which it feels like when you say back in 2020, things were kind of chaotic and crazy. And here we are in 2024 and things are chaotic and crazy, whatever. So it's been a chaotic and crazy time. Back when I was starting to begin to sense that and feel that, I really had this distinct picture during a time of prayer of just Jesus reminding me about being in the boat, being in the calm with the waves, rolling around and all of that. And he was in the boat. And so therefore the boat wasn't being tousled to and fro. He was just like, I am the anchor. I am the calm. I am with you. I still the waters, the wind and the waters know my name. And so just amongst the frenetic, frazzled world, just staying with Jesus in the calm was really important. And so that reminded me of the storm, the eye of the storm, where the calm is. And what I learned was that the more ferocious the winds, the more intense the storm, the smaller the eye is. And so I just was like that. I just thought that was so fascinating. So the more hectic and the more polarized and the more conflict that we're sensing out there, I think it's ever more important to find that place of calm, to find that place of peace. And it tells me, because it's going to be smaller, it may be more difficult because things are just raging around you. But if we can be diligent to remember who we are in Christ, not to get cliche-ish, but seriously, who we are in Christ, that will enable us, I believe, to find that place of peace and to find that place of calm. It doesn't mean that we don't know what's going on. It doesn't mean that we aren't aware. It doesn't mean that maybe we don't even feel some of the brunt of it. It just means that we are in a place where we are being kept and held by Jesus. And I just think that's something to remember, whether it's, you're dealing with social media stuff, which it feels like a lot of this is coming up there, whether you're dealing with family stuff. And it's just so sad to me that so many families are being literally torn apart by this kind of stuff, whether it's, neighborhood stuff, community stuff, whatever it is, just remember that he holds us in the eye of the storm. And that is where the calm is and the protection is. So kind of a long nugget. I apologize.
No, that's a great nugget. In fact, I kind of wish we would have closed with that one, because that one is just so kind of encouraging and inspirational. Mine is more aspirational, and I just, when I think of this bearing with one another, I just look at, like, some of the distress that people experience in the world. And I'm talking about like other parts of the world,
Yeah.
I was just looking at some of these communities in Africa where they're having all of these civil wars.
Yeah.
And these families are kind of on the run through desert and jungle and through just horrible terrain, and they have a hard time having food and drinking water, but the war is like, causing them to do this, and then the families get split, and you have like war and how that just fractures families, and like they want nothing more than to be together with the people that they love. And I just think it's so tragic that, come to America and people are voluntarily splitting with their family over some dumb bureaucratic issue. And I think that's tragic. But in response to that, I just think that you look at what the early church had to endure, to bear with others. And when you look at the call to bear with others in the New Testament, the standard that's set is really, really high. And we're not bearing with others at that level at all. In fact, we're separating from others from issues and challenges that are so small compared to what the early church endured, just so that they could maintain this unity. And I just think of, and I think we talked about this on Saturday as well, the fact that when Jesus washes his disciples' feet, one of those disciples is Judas, and he knows that he's going to betray him, and he still washes his feet. And most of us are not having to endure relatives who are about to crucify us, literally.
Yeah.
And yet we still can't even bear with them, even though we disagree on some, top-down government management issue. And it's just like we're falling so far short of the example of bearing with others that Jesus sets. And even the early church, I mean, you look at the Apostle Paul, who the book of Acts tells us that his whole life was devoted to maintaining Jewish purity. And so he was just ferocious about this, where he was in charge and passionately motivated to go and execute Christians because they kind of represented this warping of this Jewish tradition. And so the early church was just terrified of the Apostle Paul, because he's out there killing Christians. And then he has the encounter with Jesus. He realizes that the Christians are right. And now you're the early church, okay? You're this small community of people living for this, Messiah who is all about love and all these promises. And you have this leader who has been destroying your lives, slaughtering the people you love. And he walks in through the front door and says, I want to be a part of your community. And they said yes. I mean, nobody in America that I know of has to endure that type of persecution and then have to then bear with that person. The scriptures have such a high standard for bearing with others, and we tend to exclude and cancel others for pretty trivial things. And I would like to see us strive and aspire to bearing with others at a higher standard than what we have done. That is my nugget.
Hey, I think that's a great way to end today's show, because that is a lofty aspiration, and you are so right. We are so lacking. And I feel like like we say with many things, like it's a high call, what we're talking about here. But if we can't even do this, we're never gonna get there. And so this is why I love the imperatives. This is these are things that is are to be a part of the fabric of who we are, regardless of what's coming our way and what's, swirling around. And there's not a what about, and what about, yep. You're still supposed to be gentle. You're still supposed to show patience, bear with one another, compassionate, kind, blah, blah, blah. So good job on this series. Good job getting us to dive into these imperatives. I think that's amazing. Good job, you guys, for tuning in and hanging out with us and commenting and all of the things. We really do appreciate it. And we will. Oh,
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is this the book that you're ordering?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is the one I'm also starting. So
I
was just curious.
Okay. We're gonna be in a little book club together.
Well, right. And that's the way it is when you're working on a team with Greg, is he'll say, oh, hey, I'm reading this book. You should read this also. And I'm only a third of the way through the 700-page book that he recommended last week.
Exactly.
And so, we have lots of homework here, which is good.
No doubt. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Dan. Further proof that we are doing the work, man. Yes. Let me just say, when we started Revelation, there was a particular commentary that, he wanted us to get and be reading through, which has been great. And then there have been a few other supplemental resources. He's like, no, this is really good as well. So we're getting those. And then he brings up this one, and it's like,
look at this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Look at this one.
Oh,
look at that.
Gosh.
You could build a house on that.
Oh, you could. Good
that's good, though.
Lord.
That's a good one, though.
Yeah. So we're putting in the time. We're doing the work. All right, you guys, have a wonderful week. Please continue to tune in, comment, circle back, have these conversations. It's all really good stuff. We appreciate you and are so thankful that you're a part of this cool little community we've got going on. Take care.